Welcome back. President Trump's former campaign chairman and 2 others have received federal indictments. So what does that mean? There's a lot of legal jargon being thrown around. So here to weigh in is our legal contributor, Seth Pajcic from the law firm of Pajcic & Pajcic. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So he's obviously going to be joining us on a weekly basis to talk about some of the hottest legal topics that have a lot of us talking on Facebook, on Twitter, at the dinner table, so it gets a little awkward. But today we want to specifically talk about the Mueller investigation. So to kind of set a nice little foundation for it, what is the difference between conspiracy and treason?
Well, conspiracy is, if, say, for example, you and I, we got together and we wanted to commit a crime. We would conspire together to commit that crime. We talked about it, we made a plan. That's conspiracy. So conspiracy in itself is not a big deal. Actually, the more pressing issue would be the underlying crimes that they're accused of. Conspiracy itself is just 2 people talking, coming together, coming up with a plan to commit a crime. That's conspiracy. Treason is a very big deal. Treason is when you are conspiring, you are not conspiring, but you are actually actively doing something against the United States. You're giving aid or comfort to the enemies of the United States. You're waging war against the United States. That's treason. So treason is punishable by death. A conspiracy, I think, is a minimum of 5 years and a fine. So conspiracy in itself is not that big of a deal. It sounds really bad, but the worst thing are the underlying charges here in the case, not the conspiracy. The conspiracy just sounds juicier. That's why you see it a lot in the media.
Yeah, because it sounds awful. I mean, Paul Manafort and Rick Gates basically have the same number of indictments against them for, embezzling or laundering. And I guess with the 2 of them, how likely is it that they'll get the same sentence if they were to be convicted of what they've been indicted on?
Well, I think what most likely, what the special counsel is looking to do here is to use these guys to maybe get at other people in the investigation. They threw a lot of charges at them. And they're looking right now, these guys are looking at spending the rest of their life in prison.
Oh, wow.
Neither of these guys want to spend the rest of their life in prison, especially Gates. He's younger than Manafort. He has a young family. He doesn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Neither does Paul Manafort, I'm sure. So they threw all these charges at him. They're very serious charges. Both could spend the rest of their life in prison. I would imagine, I used to be a prosecutor. While I was never involved in anything this serious and this, rising to this high of a level, they definitely, I think, want to use these guys to testify and maybe get some bigger fish up above Paul Manafort.
Well, someone who we didn't think was a big fish in this case, but ended up being the first one to kind of sing like a canary was George Papadopoulos, because he's been accused, and apparently rightfully so, of trying to set up a meeting between Trump's campaign and Russia. And he already pleaded guilty to it weeks ago. What does that mean for the rest of the investigation with him already saying, yeah, I did it?
Well, again, the crime that he pled guilty to was not trying to set up a meeting. The crime he pled guilty to was lying to the FBI about it. When he was asked by the FBI, were you in touch with the Russians? Did you try to set up this meeting? He said, no, I had nothing to do with it. And then they had evidence that he did. And that's what he pled guilty to is, I lied to the FBI. You can't lie to the FBI. That's a crime.
That's that's that big of a crime.
Yes, and that's what he pled guilty to. Now, the interesting thing is this happened way back in July. And he's obviously a cooperating witness. What other information has he gotten? What other information does he have that can be used against, again, higher up people, Donald Trump Jr., other people higher up in the campaign? As a prosecutor, what are you going to do? You're going to start down on the bottom, and you're going to use the people on the bottom to get the people at the top. It's just like in the mafia. You don't start off by getting the head of the family.
Right.
You start at the bottom, get the worker guys, and you use them. You get wiretaps, you get them to be cooperating witnesses, and that's when you go up and you get the higher people higher up. And that's exactly what's going on here.
And so let's talk about kind of how or if this even connects to President Trump and his family at all, because he's already come out and tweeted there's no collusion, there's nothing, this is a wild goose chase. But before they had said that George Papadopoulos was kind of a nobody in the Trump campaign, wasn't that big of an advisor, but he was in the room with then the Republican candidate. So he was important enough to be in that room to talk about setting up a meeting with Russia. Does President Trump have anything to worry about now that he's kind of been caught in this little white lie?
Well, an interesting thing is there's a Washington Post editorial board meeting where President Trump spoke at back during the campaign, and they asked him who his foreign policy advisors were. He remembered 2 names, Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. Those are the only 2 names he could remember of all his foreign policy team. So to say this guy wasn't important, that was one of the guys that Donald Trump remembered the name of. Carter Page also, remember, he's very involved in the Russian thing too. At the same time, I would think that President Trump was kept at a distance on what exactly was going on with Russia. I don't know if you're ever going to get to President Trump as far as colluding. Obviously, there was some collusion going on, or at least some attempt at it, because we have Mr. Papadopoulos already, lying about it. We have the meeting of Donald Trump. So there was at least an attempt at the collusion. If I was President Trump, I would be concerned for my family members that were involved in the campaign.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for helping to clear up some of these legal terms for us. The conversation will continue at noon sharp on the First Coast Living Facebook page. So join us there, and who knows, you might be able to answer some of your own questions. First Coast Living continues right after this break.